Good afternoon. I'm Xiao, the lead for RUPH, the Rapid Urbanization and Population Health Research Network. I'm an associate professor in urban health and environment at the School of Population Health in UNSW. Welcome to our first RUPH webinar. I would like to show my respects and acknowledge the Boundico people who are the traditional custodians of the land of elders past, present, and emerging on which this meeting takes place, Kensington UNSW campus. Over half of the world's population are living in the cities, and this number is rapidly increasing while we are speaking. The UN predicts that almost 70% of the population will live in urban areas within 30 years. Cities provide jobs, better healthcare access, and many other conveniences. But it's not all good news. Inequalities within cities are related to some of our biggest public health challenges, like heart disease, diabetes, and obesity. A major reason why I felt the need to start RUPH is because these public health challenges associated with rapid urbanization cannot be fully understood or addressed by any single research discipline. We need to work together, drawing on talent across the whole of UNSW. My own research shows where we live matter to our health, from places to buy food to green space in which we can be active. But to create the evidence-based blueprint for positive changes in society, we also need contributors from urban planning, law, engineers, economics, psychology, business, the arts, humanities, and social sciences. That's why I have intended for RUPH to be a whole of university research network that collaborates with government, industry, and the local communities. The RUPH Research Network currently has over 60 UNSW researchers affiliated across all faculties. Together, we will explore urban health and environmental issues and support building of cross-faculty research capacity among UNSW academics conducting research in Australia, Asia, and the Western Pacific regions. The development of RUPH was supported by my colleagues, Professors Rebecca Ivers, Evelyn DeLu, Bin Jalaluddin, David Sanderson, and Helen Lockhead. I also would like to take this opportunity to thank Jess Sixstone, Vanessa Carley, and the UNSW Grant Challenge on Rapid Urbanization for their support. RUPH aims to build new capacities for policy-relevant research. We will generate knowledge sharing and collaboration opportunities. We will also try to connect earlier and mid-career researchers to senior academic mentors. That is why we're here today. Thank you very much for joining today's webinar. Let's get started. Now, I would like to introduce Professor David Sanderson, who is the lead of UNSW Grant Challenge on Rapid Urbanization, who will give us a short talk. Over to you, David.
Thank you, Xiao. I think you said it all with a fabulous introduction about the issues, the challenges, the rate of urban growth, the reason for the fabulous network which you initiated and are shepherding through. And so there's very little for me to say, which is a very good thing for everybody, I'm sure. But I'll just say 3 or 4 sentences if I may. The first is it's an absolute thrill that the Grand Challenge in Rapid Urbanization has been able to be a part of this story. This is your initiative. It's owned by those who are going to be in the network, and that's very exciting. And that's what gives us a thrill, actually. The Grand Challenge in Rapid Urbanization was set up some 2 years ago. It's one of a number of grand challenges which UNSW has been pioneering, I suppose, in terms of thinking like this. And for all the reasons you just said, Xiao, the Rapid Urbanisation Challenge was one that was chosen as a very important one, given the world and how quickly the world is urbanising. I think one thing that really excites us is the interdisciplinary activities that have been going on, and you've said that perfectly. And that's really where your network comes in, this network, RUPH. Today's inaugural session does have a great mixture of people from all kinds of backgrounds and all kinds of interests who are really getting on with their careers and excited by that. And seeing where these things flourish and where people overlap and where we learn from each other, things we don't know, we don't even know about, is the exciting bit. What's terribly exciting as well, we have someone who knows all about city management speaking in a moment. So I just want to say how exciting it is to be able to hear you speak, Monica, in a few minutes' time. And I think we're all excited by that. But back to you, Xiao, and really looking forward to this network really flourishing.
Thank you very much, David. I really appreciate all your support and the kind words. So now I would like to welcome our keynote speaker, Monica Barron, the City of Sydney CEO. Monica has been the Chief Executive Officer of the City of Sydney since 2006, having overseen the development and implementations of the city's long-term vision for Central Sydney, Sustainable Sydney 2030. Monica will present for 20 minutes. She will then have 10 minutes to answer your questions. So to the audience, please, if you have any questions for Monica, and you can type your questions in the Q&A chat window, and I will read it out. Over to you, Monica.
Thank you very much. And it's really a great honour to be invited to speak today and address you all. So for most of my professional life, I've devoted myself to addressing the global challenge arising from the migration of populations towards cities. Through my work at the City of Sydney and through participation in global networks such as the C40 and the Resilient Cities Network, my focus has been on finding ways to design and manage cities that are socially, culturally, environmentally, and economically just and responsible. This includes an understanding that a population's health is a measure of our social, cultural, and economic justice, and that environmental inaction also contributes to poor health outcomes. In short, my career has been spent finding ways to create a positive nexus between density, fairness, and sustainability, thus building resilient cities. Everything I've studied, learned, and transitioned into policy planning and action is predicated on promoting the opportunities that derive from people living and working in close proximity to each other. And then along comes a shock event that can't coexist with density. A pandemic where the risk is infection and the mitigation measure is physical distancing, flying in the face of everything I know about how to plan for and manage cities. Today, I've been asked to speak to you about rapid urbanisation and population health, which is a challenging topic in the current circumstance. Nevertheless, I hope that what I will cover today will be both pertinent to how we approach the current challenge as well as the ongoing challenge facing cities. But like Xiao, I'd like to begin by acknowledging that wherever we might be meeting, we are meeting on the land of First Nations people, and I pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. Today, I'll speak about rapid urbanisation and population health through the lens of resilience and suggest that if we approach planning and running our cities through the lens of resilience, we will find the positive nexus that will lead to cities that are able to adapt to shock events and thus protect the health of their citizens. As we face the challenge of this pandemic on the heels of the bushfires and the floods across New South Wales, we are gaining a growing understanding of how our personal, organisational, community and economic resilience will contribute to or detract from our ability to fight this new threat and to recover from it. The people, organisations and communities that are more resilient are doing better than those that aren't. The things we do well are holding us in good stead. But what we don't do well is revealing our vulnerabilities. As we look around the world and within our own country, the fault lines in the systems that support our societies and economies are being exposed. More than ever, people are able to see the impact of things like inequity, the downside of globalisation, the shortcomings of the trickle-down economy, the injustice and risk posed by an unfair labour market, and of course the impacts of climate change, to name a few. How many will be sacrificed during this time, either by losing their lives, their health, or their livelihoods, is inextricably linked to how resilient our social and economic systems are. We already know the nations with good quality and fairer health systems will have less deaths. Nations that are wealthy and generously share their wealth will bring more of their citizens with them through recovery. Nations that have a diversified and more independent economy that can withstand disruptions will bounce back more quickly. And nations and communities rich in social capital will have a greater capacity to find ways to formally and informally extend social support. And most importantly, nations that have good governance and a strong and respected public service, where citizens trust that their elected representatives are acting in the public interest, will always do better than those that don't. All these things are the attributes of resilience, which is why looking at the world through the lens of resilience is so useful to those of us that are interested in delivering public policy that addresses urbanism. Despite the situation in Victoria, Australia is still doing very well by many measures because we have many of these attributes. Nevertheless, there is much we can learn through this time that could lead to us becoming even more resilient in the future. The first thing I always do when I turn my mind to a challenge is to ask, what are the underlying values and principles that should guide our work? At the City of Sydney, we never do anything without having this discussion. We never do anything until we've described the action we will take within the bookends of values and accountability and developed a clear narrative to link the two. Of course, we have an overarching vision, purpose, and values against which we calibrate any discussion, but we also adapt these as they apply to the situation at hand. The reason for this is fourfold. Firstly, it enables us to take the time to consider the problem carefully and ensure our action is consistent with who we are and what we stand for. That is our values. Secondly, it ensures the strategic intent of everything we do is clear, coherent, and aligned, which provides the clarity and authority that staff need to confidently act. That's our principles. Thirdly, it means that everything is brought back to purpose or our vision, which anchors our staff, our organisation, and the community we serve. And finally, it leads to good governance, ensuring everything we do is transparent and fair, understanding that good governance leads to trust, and trust is the essential ingredient that gives us the social license to operate. However, today, I'm going to refer to a phrase I often use that isn't formally adopted by the City of Sydney, but is useful as we deliberate. It's a phrase by Bliss Brown from Imagine Chicago, and the phrase is, an economy where no one and nothing is wasted. This is a phrase I've referred to for many years, and there are many versions of this kind of thinking that I could use instead, but I really like this one because it doesn't take much explanation. It means what it says. It asks us to imagine a world where every living thing and every resource is recognised as valuable, and suggests, therefore, that the economic model that we should pursue is one where no living thing or resource is wasted. At the City of Sydney, I always say to staff, if they only remember one thing, it is that we are here to pursue social justice and climate action. And if we stay true to those things, we can't really go wrong. This phrase reminds us that social justice and climate action is transacted within an economy, hence we should strive for an economy where no one and nothing is wasted. So now back to the role that resilience thinking and planning can play as we tackle this new and significant challenge. What I hope is that this presentation will contribute to the conversation many of us are having about how we might use this significant shock event, or any shock event for that matter, as a catalyst for change, a change for better. In short, as we recover, could we perhaps become stronger and fairer, and as a consequence, more resilient to the shock events that we know are probably going to become more frequent? And can we use the measures we are taking to deal with COVID to trial measures that we might continue with if they contribute to a more resilient city? Before I reflect on this in more detail, I'd like to provide some background. The City of Sydney has had a long-standing interest in building resilience in our people, our organisation, and our community. We've hosted the Sydney Resilience Office for nearly 5 years and have worked in collaboration with the 33 Metropolitan Councils of Sydney to develop the Sydney Resilience Plan. The definition of resilience in the Sydney Resilience Plan is the capacity of individuals, communities, institutions, business and systems within a place to survive, adapt and thrive, no matter what the shocks or stresses they experience. In order to develop our plan, we utilised a methodology developed by the Resilient City Network, formerly the Rockefeller 100 Resilient Cities. Put simply, this methodology uses a range of inputs to determine the probable shocks and stresses that impact a community in its place. A shock is an acute event such as a bushfire or a pandemic. A stress is a slow underlying chronic vulnerability that can lead to a shock or accentuate the impact of a shock. The methodology looks at past events based on previous disasters such as heat waves, possible events based on information such as climate risk data, and vulnerabilities such as socioeconomic indicators to determine what the shocks and stresses in a community are likely to be. When we applied this methodology to Sydney, we determined that the likely shocks would include bushfires, heat waves, floods, cyber attacks, and pandemics. And the likely stresses would include housing affordability and homelessness, declining social cohesion, inequitable growth, and disjointed governance. Then we worked with many people across metropolitan Sydney and developed a plan of action that we agreed would help us prepare for and mitigate these shocks and stresses. That is what a resilience plan is. A resilience plan is a description of what might happen and what we will do to prevent it happening or to mitigate the damage as it does happen, so we can recover as quickly as possible with the least impact on our communities and economies and places. Yes, it's a risk management plan, but there's one significant difference. It is a place-based risk management plan that is developed through the eyes of the community. It is a methodology designed for cities. And as a consequence, as always happens when you work with a community, what the community prioritises as of most value is often different to what experts or bureaucrats prioritise. I'm not suggesting that this is better or more important. I'm suggesting it is of equal importance. When a disaster strikes, we know and are grateful for those that protect us, such as the Rural Fire Service, Emergency and Rescue, and the healthcare workers. We are grateful that those that attend to our essential needs and infrastructure are on the job. During a natural disaster or terrorist attack, they secure our water, our energy, telecommunications and transport. During a pandemic, they provide the testing, give advice, and deliver our acute healthcare services. Good and trusted government that can expand quickly and coordinate emergency response that is required during the emergency response phase. But in the recovery phase, government really needs community with its local knowledge and commitment that people have to their families, communities, and the places they live. Recovery needs an all hands on deck, and a resilience plan helps us pre-plan what that might look like and how it will be implemented. The last thing you need during a crisis or during recovery is staff, organisations and communities freezing into inaction because they don't know what to do or what role they play. And the last thing we need is disengaged and disenfranchised citizens. The more active and autonomous people are, the more they are invited to be part of the solution, the more quickly we can recover and the better people will be. A resilience plan offers the opportunity to have that conversation with the community before the disaster or shock occurs. But a resilience plan also does more than outline what will be supported, reinstated or rebuilt. It is also an opportunity to discuss whether something should be supported, reinstated or rebuilt, or if it should be supported, reinstated or rebuilt in a different way or in a different place. It provides an opportunity to use data like climate risk data to understand that sometimes things cannot go back to the way they were. And by having the conversation and planning before the disaster, a community can be prepared and ready to accept the change, and the authorities who fund recovery can be party to this plan. There is a famous story about a bridge in Queensland that was rebuilt and washed away 3 times before it was accepted it was in the wrong location. The community needed the bridge. The local government knew it was in the wrong place, but the recovery funding system only funded like for like, so they had no choice but to rebuild in the wrong location. A resilience plan is much more than a disaster and recovery plan, but a disaster and recovery planning process is a good start. Disaster planning and recovery is a terrific lens that can reveal all the interrelated issues. As I always say to local government CEOs and general managers, if you thought you had an infrastructure backlog before you prepared a resilience plan, wait and see what it looks like when you look at your infrastructure through the lens of resilience. The resilience lens enables you to prioritise your critical infrastructure, fortify it, to withstand the shocks it might be exposed to, and also understand your infrastructure deficits, like having only one road in and out of a community that is rated at high risk. A resilience lens also enables you to consider how you shape and prioritise your city's infrastructure investment to mitigate risks, such as increasing canopy and greening and open space of your city to reduce the impacts of heat waves. One of the most important things that I've learned from this process has been the understanding of the importance of understanding your community vulnerabilities or stresses, and the role that local government plays in this. At the City of Sydney, we have measured wellbeing indicators since 2001. One of our survey questions is how readily can you access $1,500? $1,500 being enough to scrape by for a couple of weeks if you have no income. This indicator helps us to understand the level of financial stress in the community. During this pandemic, we have found that we are now serving a city where thousands of people have lost their livelihoods, and because they are international students or visa holders, are not eligible for government support. We knew, and our indicators helped us to know, that we could expect that most people could last a couple of weeks before their basic needs such as food would be at risk. Council quickly agreed to an emergency grant of $2 million, and then our staff set up the coordination of the emergency food services across our city. Working with 60 community organisations and businesses, the Departments of Health, Justice and Police, we are now delivering 20,000 meals and 1,500 hampers a week. We set up a community hotline to take referrals, and we take calls from individuals and businesses who want to help. We are coordinating food supply from many providers and coordinating distribution through the many community organisations. We have 12 Aboriginal organisations in the network. We are now using our home library service and Meals on Wheels to try and find vulnerable people who may not be digitally or socially connected and are missing out. The point I'm trying to make is that local government is very well placed to know these vulnerabilities or stresses and to respond to them. The City of Sydney already knew the numbers of financially vulnerable people through data that we collect through wellbeing indicators. We already have many of the vulnerable people on databases such as Meals on Wheels or Home Library. We already know all of the community organisations because we work with them and supported them over the years to be viable. The community know how to call us for referrals. We already have a call centre and a hotline. We have trucks and vans that can be redeployed to undertake deliveries. But most importantly, we are good at coordinating. We understand the risks on the ground and we know what doesn't work if it's not coordinated, such as volunteers or donations. A resilience plan is an opportunity to think these things through and set up the basic systems and infrastructure before disasters occur. Resilience planning is not just about hard infrastructure. It's also about planning for the services we need to deal with the shocks and stresses in a way that might lead to sustained effort, even when we're not facing a crisis. Supporting more active transport is another aspect of what we've had to do recently to deal with the pandemic. The City of Sydney has always had a commitment to creating a walking and cycling city. Walking and cycling is important both for health, but also as a way to deal with greater population density. We recognise that if we could not discourage car use, we couldn't discourage car use if we didn't offer a safe, active transport network that provides people with a means of getting around. We also regard the provision of this infrastructure as a way of reducing the cost of living and improving social inclusion and health, since walking and cycling is one of the most cost-effective transport options, thus addressing the stress that is caused by income disparity. Finally, active transport is also the safest way to get around during a pandemic. So we've recently added many kilometres of pop-up cycleways to our network to assist more people to get around easily. The newfound support for installing more active transport infrastructure is an example of something that has been delivered to assist with the COVID planning, but we hope will be maintained in the interests of improving the city's resilience and health from now on. I've spoken about the services and infrastructure that cities need to be resilient, and I have spoken about the way we are using the shock event that is this pandemic to institute or accelerate changes that will not only deal with the crisis, but improve our resilience and health into the future. But before I end, I want to say something about how we build a resilient economy. At the City of Sydney, we are now investing more deeply in the idea of community wealth building as the lens through which we consider our economic planning. Community wealth building, and I quote, is a people-centred approach to local economic development, which aims to redirect wealth into local economies. The 5 pillars are socially virtuous procurement, fair labour practices that also support disadvantaged communities and people, using public land and property for positive community outcomes, harnessing wealth and savings for local community benefit, and encouraging plural and democratic models of business ownership to build wealth that stays in communities. Many of these things are already supported or happening at the City of Sydney, but our intent is to drive these outcomes more explicitly by doing things like setting procurement targets that achieve these objectives, coordinating our procurement to influence better social, environmental and economic results, and using our grants and economic development activities to these ends. So in conclusion, despite the impact of COVID, the reality is that over half the world's people live in urban settlements and cities, and I think it's unlikely that this will do anything but increase. Therefore, city planners will always have to address the impact of rapid urbanisation and population health. COVID has shown us that the attributes of our cities that can support good health in its fullest sense, and those that threaten it. Planning for resilient cities by planning for shocks and addressing underlying stresses enables communities to express what they value and need most. This in turn leads to investment in the infrastructure and services that will aid the city to bounce back or recover as quickly as possible with the least impact as possible. But underlying all this must be an ongoing commitment to well-being for all, and that is an economy where no one and nothing is wasted. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Monica. I think that is fantastic. And also, as a resident in the City of Sydney, I'm thrilled to say what is happening and also learn more about the resilience plan. So thank you very much for all the great work that you and your team have done for us. So now let us have a look at the questions from the audience. Sir, you're very popular. It's quite a lot of questions. I hope that we can go through all of them in the next 10 minutes. So our first audience asked question is that I really like your phrase about an economy where no one and no thing is wasted. Trees are precious, but I get the feeling some people don't agree. How do we increase people's valuation of trees in our cities, streets, and gardens to prevent them being needlessly cut down?
Okay, so the City of Sydney is very, very committed to the maintenance and increasing of trees. We have canopy targets, and we're just redoing our Greening Sydney plan, which increases that canopy target, and not just trees, you know, all the planting, the green spaces, and all of those sorts of things. I think, I think one of the things that's happened as a consequence of COVID is that people have come to appreciate their open spaces more than ever, and the demand on open space has been greater than ever and has been very, very challenging for local government. So certainly we do struggle with some residents and some developers who want to remove trees, but we're just very diligent in not allowing that to happen. I think also people have understood the health benefits, are starting to understand more deeply the health benefits of green space and trees. And of course, as the city gets hotter, more and more people are appreciating the need for the greening. I have to say something, and this is such a Sydney thing to say, in terms of understanding the value, because of course we understand the value from a health benefit, from a well-being benefit. I think we understand that more. And actually, our new Greening Sydney plan actually draws on that research. So it draws on research about people's mental health and those things that is associated with the association with green space, right? So we're using that research to drive the next Greening Sydney plan. But when we first started and we started developing what with the City of Sydney called the livable green networks, and they're the streets where we really green the streets, and we've dug up many thousands of meters of hard surface and put in plants and all the rest of it. People, of course, always object when you do something new. And then one day I saw an ad, and these streets are called the Livable Green Network. So it's about the walking, cycling, and green network for the whole city, right? Anyway, I saw an ad, this is Sydney, in the real estate papers. and the real estate agents started advertising houses as being on the Livable Green Network or near the Livable Green Network. So, I mean, that's when the greening actually is converted into property prices, and that's what Sydney people understand.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And I'm looking forward to see even greener Sydney. Yeah. And great to see, you know, our research on green space and mental health have been used to making those right policies.
That's right.
Feel so happy about it. So we have a question from another audience. Said, Monica, your presentation was really inspiring. Are there some specific things we, the general public, can be doing to support you and your team to help lead to a healthier, connected, and a resilient future?
Oh, that's a very good question. Look, we in our community, and if you live in the city of Sydney, we do try to involve the community as much as possible, right? I think the best thing that, I mean, apart from when you get directly involved with the things that we do, with like what we do as a local government or with what local governments do, I think, you know, standing up for things, and I'll go back to trees, standing up for, you know, defending trees and defending the right for supporting the council to the planting is really, really important. See, we're now at a point where in terms of our canopy cover, we've almost run out of public domain space to put trees, because once we've put it down the streets, I mean, there's so many parts of the city where there isn't the deep soil, so we're not going to get trees. And now we really have to put them into, you know, we might have to lose some parking spaces for trees, and we also have to really encourage people to put their trees into private land, right? So the next big step change in terms of the canopy cover for the city is going to be encouraging, you know, private owners and developers to do that. So really, you know, get involved, plant trees, defend open space. They're the things, some of the things I would suggest.
Awesome, that's great.
Oh, and get on your bike and ride around so that then people will support the cycleways.
Awesome. So there's actually a question quite close to what you just said. Our audience said, I love traveling by bus, but living on a bus route, I also know their engines are really noisy. Is there a way we can have a quieter buses, such as electric engines or solar power?
Of course. So the City of Sydney doesn't run the buses. So, but can I say we have been advocating for a very long time for electric buses, and I do understand that the state government is starting to purchase, or will be procuring some electric buses, and we're certainly. I mean, I think we're one of the first governments to buy a fully electric fleet, but of course, electric garbage trucks and things like that are still still evolving. But as soon as they are available, we will be buying electric trucks as well, and they will be quieter.
Wow, that's fantastic. And also we probably have fresher air in our neighborhood as well. Yeah. So Leslie from our audience asked, if you're talking about the community being place-based resilience, may I ask where the community voice comes into the picture in having a say in being forced into losing its components of identity? I think you mentioned a bit earlier, but if you would like to respond to Leslie's question.
Could you just clarify that? Could you say that again? So you're asking, how does the community get involved? Where's the community voice in the work?
Yeah, I think that's what she asked. So she said, may I ask where the community voice comes into the picture in having a say in being forced into losing its components of identity? I'm not sure whether this is regarding some kind of maybe a regeneration area. Not quite sure the background, but that's
okay, I'm thinking I get it. Okay, so the first thing is that we don't do anything at the City of Sydney without very, very extensive community consultation, and we do everything from surveys, obviously, online things, forums, workshops, the whole thing, and citizens' juries. So we do, no project at the City of Sydney is done without a very, very broad call out for engagement. And we literally get thousands of people participating, which is really, really exciting. So I think, look, I think community engagement is going well, but I think the future is going to require, and this maybe comes back to the other question, how do we get involved, is going to require even greater levels of citizen involvement. And of course, we'd like to see that, because, there's nothing more fun than kind of designing solutions with people, right? And knowing that it meets people's needs. But also it's really important that people to get together and negotiate what they don't agree on. And that's really, really important. You know, that's one of the biggest challenges about city administration is that you've got so many people with so many different needs and ideas, and trying to kind of find a pathway that accommodates and provides the kind of greatest good for the greatest number of people is difficult, and requires citizens to be engaged, to give and take, to negotiate themselves locally those things. I mean, one of the things we're working on at the moment in Sydney, and this is not caused by the City of Sydney, but the rules in Sydney as a consequence of state rules around closing a street to have a party. I mean, really, what you have to do is just completely absurd for communities who just want to close their cul-de-sac and have a children's birthday party on the street, right? So we want to make that as easy as possible. But I do say back to the citizens then, if you close your street and have a lovely street party, have a really good time. But if you don't get along, don't ring me, right? Like, you need to also, we need citizens to also take responsibility. We'll do the street party and we'll clean up, and we won't call you if, somebody doesn't want to participate or won't move their car. We're big enough to sort this out.
Great. Well, that's good to know. Thank you. So I think there's the next question you mentioned a bit, but I just still read out and see whether we have further information we want to end. So our audience asks, it is so good to hear that well-being has been measured in the City of Sydney for many years now. How are well-being indicators being used in decision-making? And I think you just give a...
Yeah. So can I say, so we adopted a set of well-being indicators in 2011. I think there's about 100 indicators. So we did a really good piece of research. I think UTS helped us with this research. And so we basically scanned the world, to understand what would be a set of indicators that would give you a holistic picture, right? And also what we needed was to utilize existing data, because we couldn't be collecting the data on all 100. So about 60% of the indicators, the data comes from census data, health data, education data, and transport data. So this is data that other people collect that we then use. So they're the kinds of areas that are covered. We also have two other sets of data that we use. We do a lot of data collection, especially around the use of floor space in the city. We do very comprehensive floor space data. So we have that information coming in. And then, of course, we do resident surveys. So there are some things that we can't get from any of the other data sources that we need to do our own surveys for. And so we use, so we then have a very clear picture. I mean, for example, some of my favorite indicators are things like levels of volunteering, right? Obviously, school retention, child mortality, all those sorts of things are really important as well, right? You've got to know the whole story. We use it in all the decision making. So when staff, come up, are developing any new projects or policies or projects, they're obliged to do it. They have to look at the wellbeing indicators and use that evidence to guide what they do, just like they have to look at climate risk data and they have to look at the economic data. They have to, everything has got to be driven by the evidence, right? So and as I always say, there's the data, and then there's people's opinion, and you've got to balance those things. There's sort of three elements that go into all decision making: the evidence, the data, right? What people say to you, and then, of course, the political piece, what the politician's policy is. And the best decisions is when you pull all of those things together and try to kind of find a position that, that reconciles those things and makes a good decision and makes good public policy.
Absolutely. I'm great to hear, things are based on evidence, which I think is very important. We still have a lot of questions here, but I think I could only now read one to you, and also we got some sum up on this one. So this audience asks, I'm wondering if we can support the bounce back from COVID by incentivizing more healthy food outlets to open in areas we might consider to be food swamps or unhealthy food deserts, so we bounce back better.
That's wonderful. Look, food quality and food security is actually a really big issue. And we've always known that it was an issue, but COVID has really really revealed the extent of that issue. And it's something that we're addressing in a few ways. One is, obviously, at the moment, we're very focused on emergency food provision. So we're really just making sure people get food. And of course, it's healthy food, right? But what we are concerned about is people's access to, and I think this is where this whole idea about kind of the community wealth piece is going. It's, you know, the community wealth piece isn't just, it's about, you know, prioritising and supporting the kind of businesses that can provide those kinds of things into the community. And so one of the things we've been thinking about is, you know, how do we provide perhaps property for food markets? How do we, I mean, I've been a member of a food co-op, I think, since I was 18 years old, right? I mean, I was in Canberra, it was associated with the university in Canberra. And then when I moved to Sydney, there was a bit of a gap. And then I moved to Manly and there's a food co-op here, right? And so food co-ops are absolutely fantastic, right? Because, you know, you're a member, so you get cheaper food. Of course, there's all, you know, you can manage all of your packaging because you can take your jars and your bags and everything and do everything that way. And I just think every community needs food co-ops. So that's it. So, and that fits in with that community wealth building thing, you know, the idea of supporting, using council and grants and those sorts of things to support the growth of the kinds of businesses that lead to that lead to those sorts of outcomes. Okay.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Monica. You know, it's great to hear everything was happening and going to potentially happen in our city where we live. And I can imagine how busy you are at the moment as the CEO at the City of Sydney. So please keep up the great work you and your team are doing. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I'm sorry I can't stay, but thank you very much. And congratulations on this wonderful initiative. And hopefully we'll meet again soon.
We will. Thank you
Bye-bye.
very much, Monica. See you
Bye-bye.
soon. Bye. So now we will move to our 5 UNSW presenters. They all have been awarded their PhDs within the last 5 years. I will briefly introduce them, and they will each talk for up to 5 minutes, and following by Q&As. So please let me introduce Dr. Natasha Guinewan. She is a postdoctoral research fellow in the School of Art and Design and a research associate in the School of Population Health, UNSW. Over to you, Natasha.
Thank you. I'd like to just first acknowledge the traditional landowners, the Gundagara people, the land of which I'm currently working on, which is from the Blue Mountains. Pay my respects to elders past and present, future, and thank you for including me in this webinar. So as you mentioned, I'm a postdoctoral research fellow at Art and Design and also work at the School of Population Health, and I research the lived experience of ageing and ageing in marginalised populations. My interest in rapid urbanisation and population health is on how we can collaborate more intergenerationally and cross-culturally to innovate and design age-inclusive settings. I feel that due to our sort of current cultural attitudes towards ageing, that we often miss opportunities that could foster greater intergenerational collaboration, which might leverage the strengths of young, old and middle-aged to provide solutions for all ages to be able to access urban environments. Last year I attended a workshop for seniors as part of the work that we do, and a gentleman in his 60s, a participant of this workshop, lamented that there were few plaza-style open areas, such as those located near urban buildings with walkway features or places to sit or shop that had accessible and affordable parking that also remained open at certain times of the day or evening and would have appropriate lighting that could foster more of an age-inclusive, intergenerational community who might enjoy one another's company while venturing out beyond 5:30 p.m. A New Longer Life, a book I'm currently reading by economist Andrew J. Scott and psychologist Linda Grattan, assert that we need to not only cater for sort of these new multi-stage lives, as we're sort of all, as a population, living longer, as opposed to the traditional three-stage life of school, work and retirement sort of model. But we need to find ways to provide environments too that promote social engagement, more intergenerational activities and cohesion to improve the quality of our longer lives. And to that degree, never before has this Spanish proverb been quite important, which is, if you want to age well, you must start when you are young. Been sort of more important, and this doesn't just mean our individual health, though this is important. It also refers to our collective health and sort of a social dimension of our health that perhaps we don't do as well in individualist cultures or consider really this dimension. So my research skills are predominantly in mixed methods, both qualitative and quantitative, which facilitates interdisciplinary type research. And I'm happy to collaborate with others who are interested in that sort of like including more citizens and co-design, and, you know, with researchers and stakeholders who see aging and longevity as an important part of our economy, culture, society and environment, and sort of all of our futures, because we are all going to be living longer if we don't have sort of health issues or injury or so on. But that's the main message. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Natasha. I just want to say to the audience, if you have any questions for our 5 speakers, please tap into the chat box. And if you can also let us know if your question is just for particular speakers, or this is a question in general, that would be great. And we will read these questions to them by the end of this session. So our next speaker is Associate Professor Ian MacArthur in the Faculty of Art Design, UNSW. Hi, Ian.
Hi, everyone. As was said, I'm from the Faculty of Art and Design at UNSW, and I work in the areas of interdisciplinary design and transcultural collaboration. So I want to talk a little bit about my research and then a blue sky idea. So Australia and China share destinies as societies facing rapidly urbanizing futures. In 2019, reported rates of urbanization in China reached 60%, with projected rates of 70% by 2030, by which time around 1 in 8 people on Earth will live in a Chinese city. Now, as early as 2014, Australia too was experiencing high rates of urbanisation, approaching 90%, in fact, with 90% of our population living in just 0.22% of our land area. So in both nations, these high levels of urbanisation present significant challenges for urban planning, for placemaking, and for the sustainability of livable, healthy urban communities. Problems include population density, accessibility and equity, congestion, pollution, mobility, affordability, community identity, climate change, and now, of course, COVID-19. So both societies urgently need smart, innovative approaches to healthy placemaking. But for the most part, when we talk about smart cities, it's usually been framed in terms of a tech-centric, top-down, kind of instrumentalist, data-driven approach. So my current research is an experimental project. It's called MetaPlace, and it aims to use Sino-Australian designed participatory urban media to test the effectiveness of co-designed screen-based interfaces in helping local government and urban planners better understand and design for rapidly urbanizing cities by involving citizens using large and small interactive screens, media facades, and mobile devices. Now, I've been working in Chongqing as a case study because it's one of the fastest growing but least understood megacities on the planet. So essentially, MetaPlace is investigating how we might enable end user participation through urban media that acts as a diagnostic community engagement layer to more efficiently and more accurately deliver innovative and meaningful solutions for healthy city development. Now, so far, we've been iterating on a prototype data visualization app, building on research done in a collaborative study between UNSW, the University of Sydney, and QUT in 2014. And during 2019 and 2020, working with my esteemed UNSW colleague, Associate Professor Feng, we've been working on design iterations that draw on co-design input with stakeholders from local government, creative industries, and academia in Chongqing. Obviously, the pandemic in 2020 has had a huge impact on this research, and it's really shifted into a completely online digital collaboration. And I invite you to test an instance of this app that we've been developing by following the link on the slide that you'll receive after this webinar. Which leads me to my Blue Sky ID. We urgently need a creative alliance, and I propose the Australia-China Art and Design Alliance to leverage relevant China-Australia art and design relationships that already exist to build a sustainable online laboratory for creative cooperation in 3 focus areas: research, education, and industry. Now, the aims of this over 2 years would be, in the research area, to map, develop, and action a sustainable collaborative art and design research agenda, establishing a Sino-Australian response to urbanicity, urban design, planning, and placemaking challenges. In the education space, it's aiming to co-design a digital education platform for networked art and design-led collaboration, focusing on applications of creative media in the post-COVID-19 city. And that would bring together students and professionals working in art and design-led disciplines to focus on developing new community-based ideas for healthy urbanisation and urban places. Now, in terms of industry, the idea is to develop an online seminar series and supporting exhibition program showcasing and sharing Australian and Chinese creative urban innovation in Chongqing and Sydney. So this Blue Sky project would build on our existing innovative collaborative art and design research and partnerships between UNSW, universities in China, and industry in both countries to work on solving the myriad urbanisation-related problems emerging in our cities. So thanks for your attention.
Great. Thank you very much, Yin. And our next speaker is Dr. Milad Gasri. He is a transport lecturer at UNSW Canberra. Welcome, Milad.
Thanks, Jill, for the introduction. Hi, everyone. I would like to start by emphasizing on the fact that the ultimate goal behind all public policies must be improving public welfare. This simple principle has been the foundation of decision-making for a very long time in both capitalist and socialist economies. In Australia, the state of practice for most public project appraisal is cost-benefit analysis, which, put in simple words, is estimating the costs and benefits of a project and then comparing them to see if the benefits can justify the costs. My argument is that this process can be improved by taking a more comprehensive approach in measuring the benefits. Now, there is strong evidence that urban form and transport infrastructure have direct impact on public mental health and well-being. We know that walkable and livable neighborhoods are more popular and can increase individuals' well-being. And this is perhaps one of the underlying drivers behind the 30-minute city vision for the Greater Sydney or the 20-minute neighborhood plan as the long-term plan from Victorian government. And both of these plans are aiming to provide convenient access to jobs and services for people. So as you see, the importance of urban form and accessibility is already acknowledged in the long-term plans. And you perhaps noticed in the keynote speech by Monica that it is already being looked into when making a decision. But the question is, if urban form and transport infrastructure can directly influence individual satisfaction, why this important benefit is not explicitly included in the project appraisal. And I think the answer is we don't have a quantitative tool to measure life satisfaction, and more importantly, its relationship with urban form. Now, if the question is how we can include these latent outcomes in the project appraisals, I would say one solution can be monetizing the impact, which in fact is just determining an equivalent dollar value for the latent outcomes. This is quite common in the field of transport. Now, one of the main benefits from transport projects is reducing travel time, and the common practice to include travel time saving in project appraisal is just converting that into monetary values using a concept called value of time. And there is an extensive literature on how to measure and estimate value of time. Now, analogous to value of time, why can't we have value of access? One of my core research interests is developing a robust and quantitative tool to measure value of access, and I believe this will enable decision makers to incorporate this concept in project appraisal. Now, to make this tool an evidence-based tool, we need data. So we need to accurately measure accessibility, and I think we can obtain that from user-generated content sources. From online maps and navigation instruments, we can obtain the closest distance to different services. And at the same time, we can count the number of accessible services within a given threshold. On the other hand, we need reliable measures for life satisfaction, and we can obtain that from surveys that are currently being rolled out. Now, we have HILDA, Household Income and Labour Dynamics in Australia, which has been started from 2001, I think. And Monica just mentioned that Sydney is also conducting a research on measuring well-being indicators, and that also has been there for many years. So we have data on both accessibility and well-being available to us, and by developing a nexus of data sets, we can investigate the impact of accessibility on well-being to come up with that robust measure for value of access. Now, as a proof of concept, we have conducted a small-scale analysis for the Blue Mountain region in Sydney. And what we found is, well, first of all, accessibility is significant in explaining life satisfaction, even after we controlled for other determinants such as socio-demographic and life events. The impact is positive. And more importantly, the impact can be monetized. So, for example, what we could do was coming up with a measure that people would value access to library and schools 10 times, roughly 10 times more than they value access to restaurants or fast food services. Now, please bear that in mind. This 10 is not what I'm trying to emphasize on, but the fact that we can come up with quantitative measures is what I'm trying to emphasize on. Now, my intention is to build up on this research by, well, first of all, expanding the geographical boundaries from the Blue Mountain region to the entire Australia. And I would like to incorporate the complex aspects of measuring life satisfaction in my analysis. So if this is something that you find interesting, please feel free to get in touch. Thanks.
Great. Thank you very much, Milad. Our next speaker is Dr. Gloria Pinata. She is a Cynthia Lecturer at the Faculty of Built Environment. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Shell. I'm really glad today to have the opportunity to introduce myself and my Blue Sky project idea at this first roof network. Achieving sustainable cities and communities is the main target of my research. I believe that sustainability is not longer an option, but it has become a moral and market imperative also in the building sector. Say that, my name is Gloria Pignata. I'm a science lecturer at the Faculty of Built Environment at UNSW, and I'm also a civil engineer. What motivated me to start my PhD in energy engineering and then my academic career was my interest for the environmental preservation and the technological innovation. During my postdoc, first in Italy and then in Singapore, where I work for 2 years in a research center affiliated with MIT, I had the pleasure to work on an interdisciplinary and impactful project, all oriented at improving the built environment from different perspectives. And all of them were characterized by a high level of stakeholder engagement. Zero Plus, for example, is one of the European projects that was of inspiration for my Blue Sky project idea, and it deals with the construction of a number of energy efficient buildings within residential settlement in Europe. That thanks to the implementation of renewable energy technologies at settlement scale, we're able to reach an overall annual energy balance that is close to zero. In all of these case studies, including the Italian case study that I had the pleasure to coordinate, it has been demonstrated that it is possible to obtain a high energy performing building at an affordable price, just by moving from the scale of the single building to the scale of multiple buildings. So if you want to know more about the project, I encourage you to visit the website above my head. So my Blue Sky project idea consists on extending the concept of Zero Plus from moving from a number of buildings to an entire residential and commercial district, with aim to increase the advantages at energy, environmental, social, and cost aspect. I would like to apply what I have learned in Zero Plus to develop a positive energy district for green communities that every year are able to generate overall more energy than they need to function. In addition, it has been demonstrated that it is possible to achieve a more significant impact against climate change and an impact on the improvement of the local microclimate if natural-based solution and mitigation adaptation strategies are planned and implemented at district level rather than at the building scale. So, of course, this project, as I mentioned, presents important drivers, but also numerous barriers. And I'm convinced that today we have all the technologies, knowledge, and skills to overcome these barriers and transform the sustainable development dream into reality. And I believe that sharing our Blue Sky project idea today within the network is important because it will give us the opportunity to explore potential collaboration and to achieve common goals in synergy. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Gloria. So our next speaker is Dr. Christopher Standen. This is also our today's last, but certainly not the least speaker. So please type in your question to the chat box if you have any for our speakers so far. So Chris is a research fellow of Applied Urban Development at the Health Equity Research and Development Unit, part of the Center for Primary Health Care and Equity at UNSW. Over to you, Chris.
Thank you, Xiao, and good afternoon, everyone. So my research focuses on the health impacts of transport and housing developments, which of course are intricately connected. And I have a particular interest in the renewal of aging public housing estates. For example, the state government's Communities Plus programme, whereby estates redeveloped at higher densities with a mix of social and private housing. Now, a stated aim of this programme is to dilute concentrations of socio-economic disadvantage, though it's no secret that the underlying motive is financial, unlocking the high value of the land on which these estates sit. But whatever the motivation, such redevelopments provide an opportunity to address high health service use and costs among public housing communities, and also health inequity. That is, differences in health and access to healthcare that are systematic, unavoidable, unfair and unjust. For example, rehousing tenants in newer homes could reduce their exposure to mold and damp. It could improve thermal comfort and reduce heat and cold stress. New shops could provide greater access to healthy foods, something Monica was discussing earlier. And some of the new floor space created could be devoted to integrated primary and community health centres, improving access to and quality of healthcare. New active transport links integrated with public transport could provide more opportunities for physical activity and improve access to jobs, education and services. While narrower streets, reduced parking supply and traffic filtering could reduce traffic impacts, including road trauma, noise and air toxin exposure. And of course, increasing the supply of social housing could help to reduce housing stress and homelessness. Although it should be noted, current proposals involve large increases in private dwellings, but relatively few additional social and affordable ones. Now, on the other hand, these redevelopments have the potential to harm health and well-being. Informing tenants they are about to be rehoused, but not when, where, how or with whom, can cause psychological distress, especially among older tenants. And fracturing established communities can lead to social isolation, loneliness and loss of support networks. And construction impacts, including noise, dust, truck movements, travel disruption, they can last for years. And then the jury is still out on the effects of changing tenure mix from majority social to majority private. New shops and food outlets may opt to cater to high-income private tenants, for example, and therefore be unaffordable for social ones. So my Blue Sky project idea is really to assess the health impacts of one of these redevelopments with two aims. Firstly, I want to understand the additional health needs of the affected community to inform health service responses. And secondly, improve the planning and delivery of future redevelopments. And the one I'd like to focus on in this assessment is the proposed redevelopments of the Waterloo Estate in Sydney's inner south, which you can see a picture of behind me, well, part of it. This will involve the demolition of 2,000 public housing dwellings to be replaced by almost 7,000 new ones, of which 2/3 will be private and 1/3 will be social or affordable. Now, this redevelopment was announced in 2015 and is still in the planning stage, with construction expected to begin in 2022 and last for 15 to 20 years. And all existing tenants have been promised the option to be rehoused within the local area. Now, a randomised control trial is not really possible for this assessment, given that we don't have any control over the intervention, nor can we randomly assign tenants to exposure and control groups, well, not ethically anyway. So the next best approach, well, in terms of level of evidence, is a natural experiment with a quasi-experimental design. So this would involve assessing the physical and mental health of a sample of Waterloo's tenants before, during and after the redevelopment, using validated survey instruments and clinical assessments. We could also ask permission to access participants' linked health data. For the control group, we could recruit residents from the nearby Redfern estate, for which there is no redevelopment planned. The quasi-experiment could be enriched with qualitative data collected through interviews and focus groups. And ideally, tenants would be involved in the study design. So finally, I mentioned the Health Equity Research and Development Unit where I'm based. It's actually embedded within the Sydney Local Health District, which serves that community, meaning we are really well placed to translate our research findings into practice. And I'd very much welcome any feedback or advice on this proposal. So thank you for your attention, and back to you, Xiao.
Oh, thank you very much. Well done to our 5 presenters. I actually have questions for each of you before we go into the general audience question. But meanwhile, audience, please also type your questions in the chat box, and I will try to read them out. So my first question is to Natasha. So do you think that facilities like parks, community centers, or churches can play a role in bringing younger and older people together to recognize each other's strengths, as you said, or you think more digitally?
Thanks, that's a good question. So I think actually both is possible. I think, however, sort of from the research I've been doing probably over the last decade or more, one of our biggest barriers is really our attitudes, our cultural attitudes. So while we have structures in place, we don't really have the sort of intergenerational activities or really underlying attitudes that really get sort of generations really, you know, sort of working and playing together. And so I think part of the conversation going forward, because we're all going to be hopefully living longer, is how can we really promote, even in our workplace, you know, more intergenerational collaboration, and that will then sort of lead to other, you know, social interactions as well. So while churches and parks are a great place, I think the social infrastructure needs to also interact with the physical infrastructure. And I think digitally is a great way to do it, but I think we need to sort of start in universities and so on, you know, really meaningfully collaborating with the different generations. So, yeah.
Thank you very much, Natasha. Ian, I have a question for you too. So I'm wondering in which ways might the screen-based technology you mentioned could help the vulnerable groups to participate in co-design of a livable city or cities?
Okay, well, thank you for that question. It's an interesting one because it's actually a topic that did emerge very early on in our co-design workshops stakeholders in Chongqing in China. Most specifically, thinking about disenfranchised groups, you know, how do we involve them in co-design and participatory processes? People like elderly groups, migrants, the disabled, unemployed people, and actually, very interestingly, people there were interested in you know, the wider ecology and like the rights of animals, and you know, how they can in fact become part of this kind of process. But I think the other thing that came out of the findings so far was, despite our initial intentions of visualizing the results of, you know, polling and participatory interactions that we conduct in China on large urban screens and media facades, the feeling in the workshops that we conducted was that a more personalized mobile device orientated approach using platforms like WeChat to develop WeChat apps that you know, gather the data and involve people in a more personal, direct conversation with you know, local government and planners. So that more personal kind of device approach opens up more potential, I think, to involve a greater range of people, including, you know, people who are disadvantaged and disenfranchised. The other thing I'd say to finish off on that is that the nature of the tool that we're developing can be really targeted around particular issues and topics and areas of interest to particular groups. And so a local government could target particular issues to investigate with particular groups. So I think that's the way that we could work towards that.
Great, thank you very much, Ian. I guess now I have this question to Milad. I think it's simple but very important question is that what aspects of well-being that should we measure? It would be great to hear from your thoughts, Milad.
Well, thanks, Jill. That's a very interesting question. I would say well-being is in fact a multifaceted and multidimensional concept, and there are various scales to measure well-being, and generally it can be categorized into cognitive measures and affective measures, and we can name a few like self-assess, subjective life satisfaction, and positive and negative effects. And on top of that, it can be measured overall, or it can be measured for domain-specific areas such as satisfaction with transport or satisfaction with neighborhood. And just adding one more complexity to that, it can be measured for like on a short-term or long-term scale. And all of these measures are shown to be interrelated and correlated with each other. So first of all, when we are talking about a robust quantitative model, we want a model that can capture all different dimensions of well-being. But getting back to your question on which one is more important to measure and involve in the project appraisal process, I would say that really depends on the scope of the project. So if we are evaluating a long-term project such as urban form or a transport infrastructure, then we probably need to give higher weights to the long-term scales of well-being compared to the short-term ones, because that infrastructure will be there for many years to come, and it also takes time for people to realize and understand its and observe its impact on their well-being. But if we are dealing with a more short-term temporal project, then we perhaps need to put more emphasis on the short-term and probably domain-specific scales of well-being.
Thank you very much, Milad. Thank you. So Gloria, I really like, the concept about the positive energy districts. But my question for you is that what are the barriers to develop urban green communities or see the positive energy districts from your view? Thank you.
Thank you, Shell. And I can see that a similar question has been also asked in the Q&A list. So first of all, I should say that there are several barriers, very challenging barriers that differ from different contexts and different countries also. But there are two main barriers that can be identified, and one deal with the regulatory barriers and the other one with project management barriers. So the first one is more related with the planning process and the request of approval when you have to integrate new technologies that are not being developed in the market yet. It becomes complicated. And also related to the project management barriers, I should say that this is the result of the novelty of the approach that required the integration and the collaboration of different stakeholders. Now there is a lack of standards communication protocols. And so it's really difficult to put together all the KPIs of different stakeholders and share a common view of this kind of project of large scale. So these are the main two barriers that I can mention.
Great, thank you. So hopefully that this also answers some part of the questions from our audience as well. So to Christopher, Chris, I think you have mentioned about that in your blue sky ideas, why potentially this mixed tinier and mixed income high density neighborhood might work and help us to improve the health. But I want to ask you a question about living in the high density neighborhood can be quite noisy. So how do we reduce the negative health impacts of noise in high density neighborhood? If you have any thoughts on that, thank you.
Yes, that's a great question, Xiao, and it's something I've given a lot of thought to. One obvious answer is sound insulation, but another is the setbacks to busy roads. So in Sydney in particular, we're building a lot of high density housing along major road corridors, and the noise of buses and garbage trucks was mentioned earlier. So yeah, larger setbacks would certainly help.
That's good to know. And also earlier, I'm very glad to hear that from Monica, we might be able to have more electronic engined buses. That probably is a good start. So thank you all, and that was excellent. So now I think we should have a look about the questions from our audience. I just want to mention this event will finish by 2, so we may not able to go through all those questions. We got quite lots. So the first question was for Natasha. So our audience asked you, Natasha, I agree that the intergenerational connection is important. Should we try to do this within the family and the close friends, such as bonding social capital? Or should we find ways to do it with people we might not share strong links with, which sometimes called bridging social capital? Over to you, Natasha.
Thanks. That's a good question. I would suggest that we would try to engage in intergenerational bonding in both the family setting, but also the work setting and the wider society setting. it's not something that I think comes naturally to the more individualist sort of cultures, and it's not to say that we ought to completely change our culture, you know, but I think it would be good to learn from other cultures how they really do value and promote those intergenerational connections. And there's been a few kind of examples where there's been like this mentoring of both younger and older in both directions that can really leverage a lot sort of more strength from older people in the workplace, where they, you know, have had experience in like weathering like all sorts of, you know, business difficulties and all sorts of things. And as you get older, you do tend to get more, you know, calm in crisis. And then younger people have their sort of like benefits as well, their, you know, energy of enthusiasm, all these things that can actually be working together. It's just that we see aging as a very categorical thing, or a very numerically determined thing, rather than as a life course process. And so I think if we expand our view of that and understand that we can actually learn more from the different generational interactions, and I think in that regard, I think it would be great to collaborate on you know, many things, including our built environment and how we can promote, you know, spaces that we'd want to hang out together.
Thank you very much for sharing with us your thoughts. So we have this question for Yin. I like the idea of co-design with screen-based tech. Do you have any thoughts on how we can involve people living with impaired vision or vision loss in what sounds like a process that is highly dependent on visualization? Over to you, Ian.
Okay, well, thanks for that question. It's interesting. It builds on the question you asked me earlier, I think, in an interesting way. And again, it's something that emerged in our conversations in China. There is this assumption, and I guess a bias in some ways in regard to myself as a researcher coming from a visual communication background, but it's good to challenge the assumptions that this really does have to be a predominantly visual based approach to gathering information. The ideas that I kind of came to the workshops with were actually challenged in some ways, because people were questioning, does this have to be a screen-based approach? You know, are there other interfaces? Are there other ways that we can approach this? You know, and I guess my response to the question, and you know, thinking about what happened in the workshop, is that the wonderful thing about digital media is it's so multimodal, and you know, in fact, we could create interfaces that were audio-based, for example, that employ more universal design principles that address issues of accessibility relating to vision impairment and other kinds of disabilities as well. So it's certainly not beyond the boundaries of the project that these things can be explored. As I mentioned before, we're iterating based upon the co-designed input, and input like these questions to the process that is the co-design process itself. And so we're taking all that on board, and we'll seek to kind of incorporate as much of that as possible. The other thing I'd note is that I mentioned in my presentation earlier that there was a collaborative research project conducted in 2014 with colleagues at UNSW, University of Sydney and QUT, and some of that investigated other forms of interfaces, you know, based on touch and, you know, other forms of cues to gather data.
Great. Thank you, Ian. I can see there are some other questions for all of you, but also probably Ian can share a bit more thoughts later on with us about the international collaboration. But I want to ask this question on behalf of our audience, is that to Milad, isn't part of the problem with integrating well-being indicators in project appraisal due to short-termism? The causal effects of urban environment on well-being often take a long time to observe. So shouldn't we be advocating for project appraisals to take into account impacts over 5 to 10 or even 20 years? So the long-term impact.
Well, thanks for the question. I think I partly covered some parts of this question when I was trying to address your question, Shell. So again, reiterating, well-being can be measured on long-term scales and on short-term scales. And I totally agree that most of public projects would need a longer term for their outcomes to be revealed and to be felt by the society. But at the same time, I would argue there is at the same time a short-term impact. Now, giving you an example, in Canberra, we have a light rail system which has been set up and started its operation in nearly a year from now, like last year. And when we were analyzing people's satisfaction with their living neighborhood, we realized that even announcing that project had a significant impact on increasing individuals' life satisfaction with their neighborhood for those who are living close to that corridor. Now, whether that is a long-lasting impact or not, that's a separate question. But I would say even long-term projects would have a short-term impact. Now, what we need to do, what we need to have in hand is a model that can incorporate both long-term and short-term impacts. And then a second question is how to weight these two against each other when evaluating the benefits of the project. And that definitely is a interesting and valuable research question to further investigate.
Thank you, Milad, and also who asked the question. So we also have a question for Gloria. So Gloria, the audience want to know, are the positive energy districts in other countries? So are there any examples you can tell us? And are the barriers to achieving positive energy districts the same in each country? I think you have already mentioned some, but do you have anything you would like to add?
Yes, Shell. So regarding the first question, I should say that there are some examples, some case study in some countries of a positive energy district, but they are very different in terms of definition, in terms of target that they achieve, especially in terms of the scale, because also the scale of district is different based on the understanding of different countries and different people. So it's important to check when you compare different case studies to understand which are the real targets of those case studies. So actually, the idea that I propose with my Blue Sky project idea of the district is a bit different from what already exists. Great.
Thank you, Gloria. I see there's a question asked Monica. Monica has just left us for her City Sydney business. So I'll keep that. I'll send your question to her and just actually have a look your questions. So the other audience asked Chris. Very similar research has been done in Glasgow in UK, such as the Go Wall study, and whereas other cities too. Do you consider the results of this nature experiment in Australia are likely to be different to those seen in other countries?
Yes, that's a good point. There have been previous longitudinal studies, but none and we've included those studies in our scoping review, but none of those studies has included a control group. So it's impossible to say whether changes we saw in health and well-being can be attributed to the redevelopment or other factors external. Now, also, the Waterloo estate is already high density, and it's going to go to ultra high density. So that's quite unique as well. We haven't seen that kind of change before. And also, should mention that the Waterloo community has a large Aboriginal population, which have particular health needs as well, and that wouldn't be accounted for in international research.
Thank you very much, Chris. I can see there's more question or comments than to our speakers. We don't have time to go through every questions or comments today, but all this will send to our speakers. And also please feel free to contact them. You can find their profiles and the contact information from UNSW website. And I would like to say thank you very much to everyone for participating in today's RUPH webinar. I'm Xiao, the lead of Rapid Urbanization and the Population Health Research Network. We are looking forward to seeing you in the future RUPH event. Have a nice day and take care.